In this video, I'll show you the basic functionalities of the DGMD, the dataset generator for musical devices, and in particular, this is the version designed to work with sound synthesizer. So it allows to generate a dataset that is that it capture a selection of the possible sound that can be generated by a sound synthesizer, which can be an internal plugin, so a software sound synthesizer, as well as external devices, whether these present a MIDI interface or whether they present an analog interface, for example, control voltages. So the first thing to do is to select the device we want to work with, and for simplicity, I will start with an internal plugin. So when we're working with an internal plugin, we can actually find and search the plugin that we want to use. Here you have a list of all the plugins that are available in your system folder, but in case you don't find the one that you're looking for, you can always click on this button, manual load, and you can actually browse your file system to find the VST, or if you're on a Mac, also the audio unit file that you want to load. So in my case, I will select this one, the Tyrrell N6, and as soon as it loads, you can see that something has happened here on top. We will talk about this later, but I can actually get my plugin graphical user interface. I will load a preset that I've selected to work with this for this video. And I will also do a little bit of changes so that the MIDI velocity also control a little bit the amplitude. And a handy utility that we have here is the fact that we can identify VST parameter names versus the name that they have on the GUI. Now, when we use this interface, when we need to select parameters, we need to use the name of the VST protocol. Sometimes this name can be different from the name that we see here on the screen. So, for example, this is called CUT, the cutoff frequency. In order to figure out what is the proper name on the VST interface of this parameter, we can simply enable the monitoring function. So every time I change something on the GUI, I can see the name of the parameter and I can see the actual value. So I know later that if I want to control and change this parameter, this synthesis parameter, while generating the dataset, I need to find on the menu something that is called Tyrrell cutoff. Okay, now we can keep this on the size, or we can actually close it, and I will disable this monitoring. Now, there's different ways of, there are different modalities for changing the parameters while generating the dataset, and let's start from the easiest one, which is the so-called step mode. So in step mode, all the parameters that we want to variate while generating a dataset will have a maximum, will have a minimum, and will have a step resolution, and the system will generate all the possible combination of this parameter, and for each parameter it will trigger a note and it will record the sound and it will store it on a different WAV file. Different WAV file. So something that is also quite important to do is to tell the software where to write files. So let's select an output file path, and I'll select this test folder, and all the files that will be generated will have different names, but all the names will start with the same string. So I will call this my file. Here there's other option that we can discuss later, so let's move on with the basics. Now here we have a row with 10 different synthesis parameters that we can control in different way. We can change, variate automatically while the dataset is being generated. And at the bottom, we have other synthesis parameters that are more related to the nodes that we will trigger while generating the dataset, in particular, the pitch, the velocity, and the duration. So this is the interval between the, for example, if you're using MIDI, and for VST, you actually send MIDI information, the interval between sending the node on message and the node off message. Okay, other settings here, for example, the sampling rate you want to use, the I/O and buffering size, which I always recommend to keep to identical values and as little as possible, which usually is like 64 or 32, depending on the sound card that you're using. And let's try to hear some sound, first of all, because the point of having this graphical user interface is that we can also like tweak and things around while we are preparing the settings. So first of all, we want to listen. So we want to also send the output of the internal plugin or the external device to the output channel of our sound card. I've already selected here my sound card, the Moto Microbook 2. And in this case, my speakers, I believe, are on 3 and 4. And here we have an on-screen keyboard that we can use to trigger notes. As you can see, the values here of pitch and velocity are updated, but nothing is happening because DSP is off. And now we can hear something going on. At this stage, it can be also handy to, for example, to use an external MIDI keyboard or MIDI controller to try out different things before we generate the dataset. So you can select a MIDI input, and I will select the SLMK2. It's already, the channel is already the right one, it's on the first channel, and I will enable it. And now if I press my external keyboard, I'm triggering the sound synthesizer. This on-screen keyboard and also the MIDI input is forced to be monophonic because, as we will see later, if we want to use chords, we need to use this part of the graphical user interface. Now, let's start selecting one or two parameters that we want to include within the dataset generation. So let's get the cutoff, which is the one that we were playing around with earlier. And for example, if we want to have also like the resonance, and I don't know what is the name of the resonance on that menu, I will re-enable this. And yes, this is actually called resonance. So let's go find that parameter. Which is here. Okay, now the parameters are still in disable mode. So if we want to variate and change this parameter, we need to enable them. Otherwise, they will be ignored while generating the dataset. Something else that you can do, since we have a MIDI interface, I mean, right now we can change the value of these parameters without using the GUI of the plugin, but we can actually use the GUI of the DGMD. And yes, you're hearing that the sound has changed quite a bit. But if you want to also somehow facilitate the process of exploring how different parameters work and what would be the, for example, the range that you want to use, you can also use a MIDI control change or a continuous controller. So you have to specify. We already selected the input. We already specified the channel. We need to select the CC number. And in this case, I think I have it on a 48 here. And yes, now I'm touching an external keyboard, and this is something that you may need only for testing and trying things out. You can also, it's not really necessary to have an external MIDI controller or MIDI interface for doing this. You can also still use the on-screen controller. And here for the keyboard, there are two ways of working momentary. So when you release the mouse, the notes stop, or you can hold it. And then you can see what happened when you change in the parameter. And then you can flush any active notes that may have been left over from something that you've run before. Now, let's look at the settings of pitch and resonance. For example, here I have a maximum value of 1, minimum value of 0, and step of 0.1. So when the data set will be generated, it will use all the values between 0 and 1 with a step of 0.1, so there's 11 values. Same for the resonance, so we have 11 by 11, and this is a total of 121 parameter combination, which will take a while, although this is still a fairly low number of combinations. So let's work with slightly bigger numbers, so a step of 0.2, step of 0.2, and I will start, for example, from 0.1 until 0.9, same here, 0.1 to 0.9. And there is only 25 different combinations in this case. As you can see here for the pitch, the velocity, and the duration, the labels here are a little bit different. It's not enable disable, but it's fixed or variable, simply because we always need to specify a pitch. So if we do not want to change the pitch and or the velocity and or the duration during the dataset generation, we can leave it to a fixed value. So, and this is going to be fixed here, the value of the pitch that is used to generate the dataset. So C3 and a velocity of 100 and a duration of 500 milliseconds. So these 25 different synthesis parameter will be associated with 25 nodes of a duration of 500 milliseconds, pitch C3, and velocity 100. If we also want to consider changing the pitch, then here we have minimum and maximum, and then we have the steps at which we consider different combination, including also variation of the pitch. In this case, is expressed in semitones. So if we go, for example, from C3 to C4, that's actually 12 values. And as you can see here, this number grows significantly. But if we disable it, we go back to 25. For example, if we go only from C3 to C3 sharp, there's going to be only 2 different pitches. If we put it variable, this is going to be probably 25 by 2. Indeed, it's 50. So let's see this in action, and let's try to understand what happened when we press generate the dataset. Something that you may want to specify is also for how long do you want to record. Every time a new node with new parameters is triggered, and in this case we have by default I've set 1000 milliseconds, so 1 second. So when we press generate dataset, you can see that nodes with different parameters are triggered. The sound is being recorded. You can specify whether you want mono or stereo recording here, although here you always see the stereo output if you have a stereo VST. So this is done, and if we open the test folder, this is what we find inside. Recordings numbered by an integer, and in the generated CSV file there are the values and the name of the parameters that we have enabled. Those that are disabled are set to 0, but you always get a number for pitch, velocity, and duration because we need them all the time. Pitch bend and aftertouch were actually aftertouch was disabled while pitch bend was fixed at 0. And in this CSV file there are as many rows as many files we have generated, so starting from 1 to 25. So you can reconcile the file that has been recorded with the synthesis and node parameter that we use to generate the dataset. Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, we can also change other things. So we can change, for example, the pitch. So to keep this short, I will disable the second parameter. So I will probably keep the the value of the resonance fixed at, I don't know, something quite low. And yeah, now I'm changing the pitch, so I'm considering 2 different pitches. And I will repeat this, so in this case 10 combination. And now we're using C3 sharp, so 1 semitone up. In case you do not want to use single notes and you have a polyphonic synthesizer, you can actually utilize chords. And here you can add extra 11 notes. So for example, if I want to add a second note that as a pitch, 3 semitones over this one that I consider the root of the chord, I can simply go up 3 times. And then I can specify also the velocity. The velocity can be fixed, so every note in the chord can have its own fixed velocity, or they may follow the velocity of the root. So let's try following the velocity of the root first. Or we can work with individual velocities. The files in the test folder are overwritten, so there is no need to delete them. We can also change the velocity. I mean, this one, 0 to 127 with step of 1 will take quite some time, so let's keep it short. For example, for 100, let's say from 70 to 110 with a step of 40. So this one should still be in total 10 combinations. Because I'm changing only the filter, let's use a different note. Let's use something a little bit lower. And yeah, let's have a chord with velocities that are following the root. So you may have got a feeling about how this works and what does it mean generating a dataset with the step settings. And we can enable and change the minimum, maximum, and step value for up to 10 synthesis parameter. We can also have notes of different duration. We can tweak also the pitch band, which can be set. It depends which device you're using. You can set the resolution to 7 bits or 14 bits. Usually with VST, it's fine to use 14 bits. And also the aftertouch, although it doesn't really make much sense to send a new aftertouch value when you are triggering a node, but this is something that it makes more sense to modulate it and change it over time continuously while the note is being generated, which is something that you can achieve with the sweep modality that we will discuss later. Now, another way of generating the data set is the random mode. So the settings are pretty much the same. We're still relying on the minimum, the maximum, and the step of every single parameter that we decide to enable. But in this case, a combination of synthesis parameter will be generated randomly every time we generate and we trigger a new node. So here you have to specify how many random combination do you want. And let's say I want 7. I want to change, for example, the pitch randomly, also the resonance randomly. The step will determine the resolution of the random number generator. So for example, if you leave it to 0.1 and you have minimum 0.1, maximum 0.9, you can only get 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 up to 0.9. If you really want to get all possible floating point number, you should set it to something quite small. So I can do. And here let's use a wider range of pitches and also, I don't know, a wider range of velocity. And lower resolution. So resolution set to 1 so I can get any possible velocity in this range. And let's bring in also the duration. There's some consideration about the timing. We need to make sure that the duration doesn't exceed the recording time, but we will get into this later. So for example, from 200 milliseconds until, I don't know, 700 milliseconds. In this case also 50. And let's see what happened. And yeah, these are the 7 files that have been generated now. These are from earlier recordings. And yeah, here you can see that there are random numbers. We're still using the chords. If you don't want to use it, it's sufficient to bring down the offset value. And then it doesn't matter whether you leave this to individual or follow the root. Now, regarding the timing, as you can see in this section, there are quite a lot of values that you can set. I'll bring in an illustration to explain you what is going on in this case. Now, there are two things that are quite straightforward. The duration of a note, which can be set here, either to something fixed or to something variable. So when we set it to variable, we always need to refer to the maximum as the worst case scenario. Or if it's fixed, we will refer to the fixed value, but let's leave it to variable. And the duration of the recording. Generally, we want to record a little bit more than the duration of the note. But things here has to happen and happen in a very timely manner. So every time we have a new combination, whether it's through the step mode or whether it's through random mode, we need to send, the system send the updated synthesis parameter to the sound synthesizer, whether it's a VST or an external device. And generally, you want to allow a little bit of time for this parameter to kind of like settle. If you send a new set of parameters and you immediately trigger the note, you will hear, it depends on the specific implementation of the VST, depends on the buffer size, it depends on how the hardware synthesizer works, but you may hear some kind of like the parameters are not yet settled to the new value. So generally, you want to leave a little bit of time. And this one, it's specified here. How much time do you want to wait after sending a new set of parameter, which happened, let's say here, I'm sending the new set of parameter. If you consider that on the horizontal axis here, we have time, we can, this is our time axis. And by default, this value is 100, which is, in my opinion, sufficient most of the time. Of course, it has an impact on the total duration of the dataset generation, along how much does it take. So you can try to bring it a little bit lower if you want or if you need. Then, after parameters are sent to the sound synthesizer, and after this delay here has passed, we can actually trigger the note. And the note will last as many milliseconds as we specify from the duration, so whether it's fixed or variable. But let's stick to worst case scenario. So for example, in this case, we have a duration of 700. What will happen is that the recording will not start immediately. You can start it immediately at the same time as you trigger the note. But you may specify a delay. So the recording will start only certain number of milliseconds after you've triggered the note. And this is specified here. Note on to recording start, which is set to 0. So in this case, it starts immediately. But for example, if you're not interested in capturing in the dataset the attack part of a note, or the attack part of your sound synthesizer. If you're looking only at the sustain part, for example, you may want to skip it. So specifying this delay, and you need to specify to an extent to which within the parameter you change, the attack plus decay part, it's over, you can actually focus your dataset generation and your recording only on the sustain part, for example, of the note. Then the recording duration is specified here. And on top of that, you can also specify if you want to wait a little bit of time before repeating the process after the recording has ended. For example, depending on how you set your timing, this is the typical scenario in which I'm kind of like recording only the sustain part. I'm assuming that after this delay, the attack and decay is over. Here there is the sustain. I record for a while, and then I will stop the recording, and then I will send the note off message. So here there is the release part of the note. And it is important to add a little bit of delay to cover the eventual release phase of your sound synthesizer, because if you don't do that, it is possible that when we start this process again, the release phase is still going. And especially if you have polyphonic sound synthesizer, when you record a new note, when you take a new recording, there's still some leftover from the previous iteration. So this one can be specified here. There may be also cases where you want to capture also the release phase of a note. So, I mean, your recordings probably has to be longer. And maybe in this case, you have recorded, you have accounted for how long the worst case scenario release phase will be, so that when the recording stops, the release phase is already over, so you can delete this. You don't really need recording end to next. So this is, you can specify this. By default, you get this number 100 here, 100 here, and recording that start right after the note on. But these are settings that you need to tweak. Here the GUI, in case when I think that there is very high likelihood that there may be overlap between the previous note and the next note. For example, if we reduce this, you will get a warning. So this 561, it's less than 100 plus 0 plus 100 plus the worst case scenario recording, and you're getting a warning. So it tells you make the note shorter, reduce the delays, or increase the recording duration. But you may have good reason, if you really are aware of what you're doing, to keep it as it is and go on with the dataset generation. Now, there is also another modality that you can use for generating the dataset, and is the one that I call a manual. Now, the manual is a little bit different because, as you saw before, in the random mode and in step mode, the CSV file gets automatically exported when the dataset generation is done. For example, for the random mode, you really need to wait the dataset generation to be over in order to export it. But for step mode, we already know all the possible values in advance. So after you click update, which in this case is going to be a huge number because we have very low resolution, you can actually export it in advance if you want. But better not trying to do that now because it may freeze the system for a while. So let's put more reasonable numbers. Yeah, you can export it in advance. So I can export it now. And let's see if this has worked. Yeah, now it's much, much bigger. And it contains all the variation of the pitch, velocity, duration, and so on that we specified through the interface. Now, you can also work in manual mode. In manual mode, nothing gets changed automatically. You have to change the values here using this part here, value. You can use either the number box, or the slider. It's good practice to keep this enabled if you want to change this parameter. And even if it's disabled, this one will change on the VST, but then the number that you're using, the value you use, it is not going to be recorded on the CSV. And when you're happy with your settings, which you can still try, for example, with the on-screen keyboard or with the external keyboard, you can ask the system to generate the dataset, and it will take a single recording with the current settings. Change the settings again. Take another recording, and okay, we have two combination. We have recorded two files. Let's write. In this case, you need to export it manually. And these are the two combinations that we have set manually. Something else that you can do in step mode and in random mode, for example, in random mode, numbers are randomly generated all the time. So even if you generate your dataset over 2 different days, then you can merge the dataset manually. You can merge the two CSV quite easily, but it can be quite painful to rename all the files. So you can decide what is the starting index. So for example, if you have recorded 100 random files yesterday, today you can start from 101. Given that you need to specify at least 200 combination, and then you have to say, okay, I want to start from 101. Okay, the total number of combination must be higher than the starting index. For the step mode is even more interesting because let's click on update. Okay, still quite a big number. Let's go back to something reasonable. Okay, I want to disable this. Okay, 81 different combination at the moment. So these are all the combinations that are considered, and in this case it can be quite handy, especially if you're generating a dataset with really a lot of combination. You can do, I don't know, from something to something else today, and then another time you can restart from a different row of that CSV. So you can break the dataset generation into, let's say, multiple days or multiple sessions. The last modality is the so-called sweep mode. As you can see, as soon as I enable it, the parameters start to go up and down. And the parameters are linked to triangular waves. The phase of these triangular waves is reset every time we restart the dataset generation and every time we trigger new nodes, but you can change the period of these triangular waves. So each parameter can be controlled by a different frequency. And the parameters, in this case, you also need to specify how many repetition, how many nodes you want to trigger. And yeah, the recording duration was quite short. Let's give it to 1 second. Yeah, the node duration was also short, so let's perhaps put 700 here. Yeah, and in this case, parameters will be swept. In this case, on the CSV file, you will find this W, which means go have a look at a wave file, because the parameters that are going up and down according to the triangular wave are saved into wave files with as many channels as the parameter that you have enabled. Only the values of pitch, velocity, and duration will be saved here. So in this case, you can see that for each of the 5 different repetitions that we've generated, we have one file, which is the one that contains the recorded output of the sound synthesizer, but also a sweep file. And the sweep file, if we open it, in this case, it contains only 2 channels because I've enabled only 2 parameters. And you can see that, yeah, there is this triangular wave going up and down. Now, these triangular waves are generated at audio rate. You can specify the bit depth, but they're then sampled. And you can specify at which bit depth and resolution you're sampling them. For the depth, I'm using 24 bits by default, but I'm taking a reading every 2048 samples, and you can reduce this, for example, I don't know, to 32 samples to have a higher resolution. This one means that every 32 audio samples, a new value of the synthesis parameter would be sent to the sound synthesizer. So if I open, yeah, in this case, you can see that those steps are apparently gone, although there are smaller steps, probably due to visual artifacts. In this case, only 2 channel, because there are only 2 parameters that are enabled, but keep in mind that if you enable the first and the 10th, you'll still get 10 channels. Now, we can sweep also, of course, the pitch bend and the aftertouch if we want, but we can also sweep pitch, velocity, and duration, although pitch, velocity, and duration are sampled from this triangular waveform when the note is triggered, and they will be held, let's say, constant. So you're not gonna hear the pitch going up and down. And also the duration is fixed. Once we trigger it, we sample the duration from the waveform, and we from the triangular waveform, and we decide the value. Same for the velocity. That's why these are the only 3 values that, even when they change, are saved in the CSV. You're still gonna get the associated waveform in the sweep file, but you get the actual values that they were used in here. Now, another interesting feature, for example, let's go back to the step. It's this, the fact that you can use more complicated pitch velocity patterns and also like duration patterns. Because using the on-screen GUI, you can only create patterns that are quite, I mean, you have a grid, and it's a grid that is either uniformly distributed between a maximum and minimum when you use random, or uniformly, or actually equally spaced, is an equally spaced grid when you select step. So even if you use the chords, it can be quite difficult to get all the different pitch and chord variation and velocity variation that you may want. So if you are in any of these modality, for the exception of manual, we can use this extended function. So we can actually use an external CSV to specify what we really want for pitch and velocity and duration, and do it again and again and again. So let's see how it works. So let's go back to something quite simple. So I want to enable, let's say, parameter 1 and parameter 2. Let's go down to something simple, 0.2, 0.2. Let's keep it even shorter, this one 0.7. And yes, we have 15 combination in total. Let's keep the duration as fixed, and perhaps we can keep it to 500. And here, yes, I think a duration of 700 here would be, for example, sufficient. Now, if we generate the data set, I will clean everything we have here, although it's not needed. We are using, I didn't even change these values, B1 and 49. Now, if you provide this extend CSV file, you can actually specify a certain number of rows in this CSV file. And for every row, the dataset will be generated one more time. So it's like clicking this button multiple times, but with different polyphonic values for pitch and velocity. Let's see an example here. This is something that I've created. The structure of this file, perhaps it would be better to to look at it this way. It's a comma separated. Different row can have different length. The first, there is no syntax internal checking of the syntax, so it is important to keep it correct. Otherwise, unexpected behavior may happen. So the first element on each row is a string, which will be added to the name of your WAV file. So AAA, BBB, CCC in this case. And then you can specify up to 24 comma separated numbers, which represent pitch, velocity, pitch, velocity. So as you can see, if I use this file, I will generate the dataset with these two variable parameters. There can be more variable parameters 3 times. The first time, pitch velocity will be 6400, 6600. Second time will be 6550, 6350. And then here I will have actually 1, 2, 3, and 4 different nodes with pitch 100, 50, 40, 80, and in this case, velocity equal to 127, but you can change it to any value you wish. So let's see this in action. And once again, I can clean everything we have here. So I will read this file. And if you select start row 1, it will start from the first row, the CSV. But if you have a very long CSV, and once again, you want to break these generation processes into multiple iteration, you can actually do it by starting from a different row. Now, you don't have to click this button. You need to do it here. So this is the second row of the CSV. So you can see that there is the string BBBB attached to the still 2 nodes, and the next should be 4. Yeah. So in this case, even to keep everything together with some script, offline script, Python script that you may want to use to analyze and process this data, you have your extend CSV, which tells you the pitch use when the ending part of the file name, when you're appending AAA, BBB, CCC, and then you have the individual AAA, BBB, CCC files, where you should only look for parameters. Here, you should not look for pitch and velocity. Indeed, it has been set to -1, which means do not look for pitch and velocity information in here, but you should get it from here. Then there are other utilities. I'll just go through some of them. For example, if you wish, it is possible to attach to the file name of the generated WAV file, so the WAV file that are saved for every node, also the parameters. So all these 10 plus 5 values will be attached to the file name. So will be the file name will also encode the parameter that are used to generate that recording, which will be quite long, but in some cases it can be handy. All the things that you're setting on this GUI can be saved into preset. So you have to write the name of your preset, and then you want to select on which preset you want to store it. I can't really count how many, but we have quite some here. Let's save it on the first. Now you can see that the color has changed from white to light blue, which means this preset is taken. And if you want to recall it after you have changed something, you can simply select, you go back to number 1 and you recall it. You can clear all the preset, you can export all the preset that you have saved to a text file, and you can import all the preset that you have previously exported from a text file. Here we control the internal plugin, as I said before, listening to device. This is a gain, is a pre-recording gain. In the last example, the sound was, since there was a high polyphony with 127 velocity, we were actually exceeding the 0 dB, so I should have set this to probably -6, -9 before recording. You also have here something orange that will blink if clipping is detected. As I said before, recording the output of the device, mono or stereo. Here you can select on your output sound card which channel you're using for listening when we enable listening to the device. In case we use an external device, the output of that sound synthesizer has to be connected to a sound card. And here you can specify the input sound card, the sound card from which you want to take the input, and which channel, left and right. And you will see this here. It will come in here if you select external. In this case, this is just my voice, actually, in this case, being recorded. Okay, let's go back to internal plugin. There's more options here. For example, if you are controlling an external MIDI device, other than using a sound card, you also need to use a MIDI interface. So here you can select your output MIDI interface. You can enable it. It has to be enabled. And you can select the channel. Now, when you are using external, I will probably off this to get rid of my voice. When you select external, as you see, all this drop-down menu from which we have selected the VST parameter are cleared, simply because we don't know the name of the external parameter. All you have to do, you have to open your MIDI implementation chart, and you need to figure out on which MIDI CC you have the parameter that you want to control. And here you can specify the number, I don't know, 47. And this parameter will control the MIDI CC 47. Now, as you know, MIDI, most devices still use MIDI 1.0, the resolution is 7-bit. So it doesn't really make sense to use very low numbers. Probably the lowest number that you want to put here, if you're using MIDI, is what is specified here in the help. As you have noticed through the video, every time I hover on top of one of these elements, you get a small description of what's going on there. And here, for the step, you say, hey, if you're using MIDI, doesn't make sense to use a number less than 1 divided 128, which in this case is 0.078125. Although, if you use 0.07, 0.07, and 0.07, just with 3 parameters in step mode, 1006. And if we keep doing this, we quickly go to huge numbers, and it will take a lot of time to generate this set. As I mentioned, we can also control devices, external devices with a CV, control voltage interface. And here you can specify how you want to trigger the note on an external device, whether it's a MIDI note or if you use the volt per octave gate control, volt per octave and gate control voltages. There's 2 different standards to display MIDI number. So sometimes the note number 60 is associated with C3, sometimes with C4. So here you can select this different standard. So you can see that, or you can use it as an integer. Yeah. You can see that the values are changing. If you're using an external device with CV gate interface, it means that it will be controlled from your audio output sound card. In this case, you probably need a DC couple interface with a lot of output channel. Some of them may be connected to your loudspeaker where you listen to the device, and some of them will control your parameter. So for example, here you can specify on which output channel you will be connecting the CV controlling the first parameter you're controlling. If you leave this to unipolar, a value of 0 is associated with 0 volt, and a value of 1 is associated with the maximum voltage that your sound card will generate. Whether if you're using those sound card designed to control Eurorack modules, generally this means 10 volts. Or you can set it to bipolar. In this case, the minimum 0 will be associated with -10, and the maximum plus 10. But this is always a trial and error process, because even if you know the maximum and minimum voltage of your sound card, you never really know what is the minimum and maximum voltage that every single, for example, Eurorack module will accept on every single CV input. So you always need to find the sweet spot and the range of interest. That's why it's quite handy to have the minimum and maximum. The step works, as I said before. There's other things that you can do here. For example, okay, if you're using CV out, you need to enable it. Otherwise, the CV voltages from this output channel will not go out. You can decide, for example, here, if you set volt per octave for triggering the nodes and gate, so this is going to be the pitch and this is the velocity, you can use the level of the velocity to scale the gate pulse that is sent to the device. Certain device, not many, but there are some devices that can detect the level of the gate and use that to control the sustain part of an envelope. So you may want to enable it. It is very important to know what is the maximum output voltage of your sound card in order to get proper pitches using voltage per octave. So here you have to specify the maximum voltage of your sound card. If it's 8, to write 8. And once you set this, probably what you want to do, you want to drive a fixed pitch, for example, using the keyboard. Maybe you want to hold it. You want to drive C2, flush the note, hold it again. Probably you also need to select on which output channel you send the gate, on which output channel you send the voltage per octave. So once all the settings are done, you want to hold the note, C2 note, and you want to adjust this number until you really get a C2. And to understand whether you're really getting a C2, you can use an external tuner, or if you click here, this one will listen to the sound coming back from the external device, and it will tell you the detected pitch and the deviation in cents. After you're done with the C2, you can repeat the same process with a C4, and you want to adjust this number to get perfect tuning. Now, other things that are left here, probably the most important part is this. Now, if you are using an internal sound synthesizer, like a VST, and you generate the same dataset twice, you will get exactly the same dataset. I mean, it's really sample accurate, given that you do not change the signal vector size and IO vector size. So it's really like sample level accurate and reproducible. So you do twice the same generation, you get pretty much the same samples. When you are using an external, especially for MIDI, if the external devices are controlled by CV gate, those are audio signal, and it tends to be more well synchronized. But if you're using MIDI and audio at different stages, they're not really perfectly synchronized. There is some jitter, let's put it this way to make it simple. Now, this one means that when you go and see your recordings, and especially if you're also recording the attack part of the note, so let's say the onset, you may see a little bit of like jitter in the attack. And this one usually is also like a function of the buffer size, and it can be as little as like 20 to 30 samples if you're using, for example, 32 or 64 as a buffer size. And if you're using buffer size of like 2048, what I notice is that it can go up to 300 to 400 samples. But it's also very difficult to generalize it, because it really depends also on the external hardware you're using. So in order to mitigate this, here there is another interesting feature. If you enable this, every time the system triggers a note, before triggering a note, something will happen for this amount of time, for 300 milliseconds. So what will happen in these 300 milliseconds? It's the following. So the delay after the parameter update, let's say that we want to start recording from the very beginning, so we don't have this delay. So instead of like triggering the note immediately, during the first 300 milliseconds, so the duration here, and this is still our time axis, this one will last 300 milliseconds. The 300 milliseconds will be divided in 3 equal parts, so 3 parts of 100. For the first 100 milliseconds, nothing will happen, so it's just kind of like a short delay. Then during the second portion, so from 100 to 200 milliseconds, a note will be triggered. So a very short note, kind of like a pulse, note on, note off. And then there will be another 100 milliseconds to allow the note to decay before we actually trigger the proper note that we want to include in the dataset. The difference between these two notes is that this note is generated with the same parameter all the time. Same pitch, same velocity, same synthesis parameter. So this one will generate kind of like a pulse, and probably you want to select settings that will give you very short release time, or if your release time is long, you may need to increase this 300. And probably a parameter setting that will give you probably a sharp attack that you can nicely detect with an onset envelope, an onset detector. Yeah. So you have a pulse at the beginning of your recording. And when you analyze this recording, what you may want to do, it's probably finding the onset, and the onset will sometime it start after, I don't know, 100 samples, sometime after 130 samples. So the first onset will be at a different place. So you want to get rid of the first of everything up to the onset plus 2/3 of this. Because remember that this onset is roughly at 100, but we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But we know that after this onset, we have, if this is set to 300, there's going to be 200 milliseconds until the actual note starts. And based on the experiments that I did, this is a decent approach that lets you either totally get rid or really minimize the MIDI jitter to really, really, really a minimum. So this is a way of doing this. Now you may ask, which are the fixed values that are used to generate this pulse? When you click enable, it will sample the current values. So if you want to generate a pulse with, I don't know, velocity E1, pitch, I don't know, pitch C2, value 60, 51, and this one something high and something high, these two are disabled. Now, when I click enable, this is sampled. Now let's give it a try. Probably we need to go back to internal. We need to re-enable this. I want to go back to step mode. Say we have quite a lot of values here. Let's bring it to 0.2. 0.2. So this is going to be very short. It's only 300. Let's increase a little bit the recording time, because now in the recording time we need to account for the fixed duration of 500 plus this initial pulse. And let's see if we can hear it. The fixed pitch, we can leave it to, I don't know, C4. This one won't, this one probably the pitch was a little bit too low. So let's bring it to, I don't know, maybe something higher, easier to listen. Also the velocity high. Okay. So now we've sampled this. Doesn't matter the value because this is set to fix. Let's put C4. Okay, some of the settings were wrong, as you may have seen. Yeah, we need to get rid of CV. Okay, yeah, now the sound is... Okay, let's try again.